Um, so yeah, thank you, Tony or Christina. So as we said it before, the panel is going to be recorded, and soon or later in the summer will be put in our YouTube channel. So no worries if you have to leave earlier or if anything happens, you can still wait for the YouTube. And Michael, yes, Brest is still a French naval base. So, as I said earlier, some of the panelists are French, so I'm going to translate some of their questions and answer. If you need any more information, don't hesitate to ask. There's a lot of people, so please mute if you are not talking, so that would be easier for everyone to understand what is going on and who is speaking. This panel is supposed to last 2 hours. As there is a lot of people, we are going to have to, and a lot of people, and we are on international time zone. We are going to have to stick to the plan 2 hours panel. So starting at here 4 o'clock and finishing in 2 hours. So I'm going to have to be quick on some presentation. We have a lot of questions to ask to our dear panelists. If we are not able to ask all of them, that would be maybe the opportunity to do a second panel on the archaeology on piracy, but we will have to stick on the 2 hours plan. So this panel, as you probably received the info on the social medias or on the ACUA mail list, is in memoriam of John Debris, who worked a lot on the archaeology of piracy. He has led a lot of works on the site and worked with Archaeologie de la Piraterie with Jean Soulat and Yann Von Arnim and Alexandre Coulaud, who are some of our panelists today. So we think of all his work, and we hope that this discussion will be very good and meaningful for all what he did in his work. I'm going to start with a quick introduction of the panelists. Connie Kelleher is not going to be able to join for the first hour. She's going to join in probably 1 hour. Ah, you are here. Sorry, Connie, I haven't seen you. Yeah, because you were supposed to be at UNESCO. So, okay, no worries. Perfect. So I'm going to call your name and do a quick presentation. So if you are able to raise your hand just to show that you are here and you are going to be one of our panelists. Today is quite special because we have a lot of panelists, so it's very great for the ACUA and for the graduate student associate. Because as you may know, we are 4 students working with Tony, Carol, and Sarah Holland at the ACUA. So it's thank you for being here. It's very important for us. So okay, let's go. So first, Jason T. Raupp, if you are here. Yeah, so yeah, perfect. Thank you. So Jason is an assistant professor of maritime studies at East Carolina University and a registered professional archaeologist. Over the past 3 decades, he has been involved in maritime and terrestrial archaeological research across the United States, Africa, Australia, Asia, Europe, the Caribbean, and the Pacific region. Then we have Leah. So Leah Tavasi, yeah. Hi Leah, how you doing? Yeah. Okay, so Leah is a PhD candidate at the University of Oxford in the Environmental Research in Archaeological Science program. She previously completed an MSc in Maritime Archaeology at the University of Oxford, where her research focused on niche elements of piracy and the sails used in the Mediterranean. Then we have Mike Thomin. Yeah, Mike, hi. He's director of education and interpretation at the Florida Public Archaeological Network and senior research associate on the faculty of the University of West Florida. His research focuses on piracy and privateering in the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic during the Age of Revolution and the early American Republic. He also co-authored a chapter in Dead Man's Chest, Even More Archaeology of Piracy from the University of Florida Press. Thank you, Mike. We have Jean Soulat. So yeah, I'm going to present Jean Soulat, Alexandre Coulaud, and Yann Von Arnim because they work together. So Jean Soulat is an archaeologist at the Landark Laboratory and a CNRS associate researcher affiliated with the University of Caen and Paris 1. In 2019, he founded with John Debris the academic research program called Archaeology de la Piraterie, alongside colleagues such as Yann Von Arnim and Alexandre Coulaud and Anoyo. He has resumed the study of the pirate wreck Beeker in Mauritius and led excavation on Sainte Marie Island in Madagascar. He is involved in numerous research projects on piracy with a particular focus on artifact studies and their globalization. Alexandre Coulaud, he's head of archaeological research at the INRAP, called Institut National de Recherche Archéologique Préventive, based at the Centre de Recherche Archéologique de Gourbert, Guadeloupe. He leads a collective research project on metallic artifacts in the French West Indies and co-directs field missions with the Archaeologie de la Piraterie research program, so with Jean Soulat. Yann Von Arnim, just here, yeah, is an underwater archaeologist based in Mauritius since 1977. He has led with over 45 years of experience in underwater archaeology and shipwreck history. He has led participated in numerous archaeological missions, including work on the slave ship Le Coureur, the British frigate HMS Sirius, and the pirate ship Beeker. Then I'm going to start with Charlie, so Charles Beeker. Hi. Dr. Charles Beeker is the director of Indiana University's Center for Underwater Science and Academic Diving Program. He served on the Federal Archaeological Working Committee for the 1988 Abandoned Shipwreck Act and was appointed to a 5-year term on the Marine Protected Areas Federal Advisory Committee in 2005. Under his leadership, the wreck of the Kedah Merchant, captured by Captain Kidd in 1699, was designated a living museum in the sea by the Dominican Republic in 2011. Then we have Connie. Connie Kelleher is an Irish maritime archaeologist specialized in the study and protection of historic shipwrecks around the Irish coast. She works with the National Monument Service of the Irish government. She has published on smuggling and piracy networks around Ireland in the 17th and 18th century. So, for everyone, thank you very much for being here. We have a couple of questions, so I'm going to first ask them, then everyone can raise their hand and ask. If anyone invited wants to ask a question, don't hesitate to join on the chat, or wait for the end of the speech to ask your questions. So first question is to do kind of an introduction and a perception of the archaeology of piracy. How is the archaeology of piracy perceived today, both by the general public and with the academic community? So I'm going to translate it in French for our French friends. Donc en français, comment est-ce qu'est perçue l'archéologie de la piraterie aujourd'hui? par le public, mais aussi par la communauté de recherche. So, anyone wants to answer? You go. Yes, Jean? Your mic is off. Ton micro est... Oui. Maybe Mike, yes, if you want to answer first, and then Jean, when he will be done with the mic, be good.
Sure.
Okay,
Can you
so
hear me okay? Everybody can hear me okay?
yeah.
Great. Okay. I don't speak a lick of French, so I'll have to translate from even though my
No
my
worries.
my family is originally from France, that's where we came from. But yeah, thanks so much for having me today. I'm excited to be part of this panel. But regarding your first question, there's that two parts to it. I think, and I'll start with the academic first. I think there's this piracy panel that we're having right now with based on your introductions. I've read a lot of these people's work over the last few decades. So I think in terms of the academics of piracy, I think it's much more of a serious there's serious scholarship behind it now. I don't think that was necessarily the case 30, 40 years ago. I think piracy in general has often been associated with treasure hunting, so it wasn't a very you know serious um, subject for academics to actually study. Regarding the public, though, I don't think perceptions have changed that much. I've been doing what we call public archaeology, or sometimes what's called community archaeology, for about 20 years now, almost 20 years. And anytime I have a conversation with the general public, I do a lot of public talks and a lot of public programming around the state of Florida and around the country. And when people hear the word underwater archaeology, the first thing they think of is treasure and pirates. So I think that the general kind of public perception of it has really been, for a long time, has been shaped by Treasure Island, Robert Louis Stevenson, at least in the United States. And that has really stuck. People still believe in buried treasure. I come from a community here in the Florida Panhandle called Fort Walton Beach. And Fort Walton Beach has one of the things that they're known for is a pirate festival called the Billy Bowlegs Pirate Festival, where they do a treasure hunt. They try, hunting for buried treasure every year. And people really believe that, even though the entire thing is completely made up, it's completely fabricated. I think in terms of the academic scientific community, it's gone leaps and bounds. But in terms of getting that information, what we're learning about what the reality of piracy was, at least, again, speaking for the United States, in my experience, we got a long way to go to convince people that not all pirates walk planks and they didn't bury treasure.
Thank you, Mike. So, just quick translation for our French. Euh,
Oh,
donc,
it's okay.
Mike, c'est OK? Alexandre aussi?
Bah, pour moi, c'est OK.
OK.
Pour moi,
C'est
c'est
pour
OK
Alex.
aussi, hein. On parle tous. Je ne sais pas s'il y en a qui ne parlent pas anglais.
OK, so we good?
Yeah, good.
Perfect. So, we can keep going. Is there anyone who wants to answer or to...
Bon, moi, je peux
So,
intervenir.
yeah.
Et tu traduis dans ce cas-là. C'est plus simple. Je vais
Yeah.
parler lentement. Déjà, c'est la même perception en France. The same
Yeah.
perception in France. You have a difference between a great public and science community, university community. You have a difference for that, for the perception of archaeology of piracy. For the great public, it's really good. It's an adventure of piracy, hunter treasure, like Mike said. But for the community, university community in France, just in France, it's not serious archaeology. I think so. It's not real archaeology without method. It's just to excavate precious artifacts like golden coins, etc. The imagery, mythology around a piracy with a treasure hunter. It's difficult to understand that other archaeologists for other periods. It's a piracy of golden age. It's not really a discipline in France. It's not. It's just a thematic of research, not really a discipline. It's in maritime archaeology, Caribbean archaeology or Indian Ocean archaeology. It's not real a period, not real a thematic. And it's also difficult to study this period, these sites in France to prove again that it's a real science to study the context and artifacts, etc. But it's my opinion for French, for French university and community scientific. And sorry for my English, it's not really perfect. But...
You did good, I think.
Very good.
Is anyone else to...
Yes,
yes,
just thank you, because both presentations were very good to the question. What we have to summarize it a little, if I can summarize it a little bit, today it is better than it was before. Because 10, 20 years ago, nobody was speaking about archaeology of piracy. And of course, it was always treasure hunting. Today, we have a small door which is opening to more scientific discipline and to be better recognized in the university. But there's still a long way to go. And we are trying our best and try to do it in the best way we can. And try to get the most information we can get out of our excavations.
Thank you, Yann. Leah, you want to speak?
Yes, hi, is this okay? Yes, awesome. So I can speak on behalf of what is taught here at Oxford and how the UK, maybe universities potentially look at the archaeology of piracy. I think the scholarship over the last 10, 20 years, especially like the X Marks the Spot, the Piracy of Archaeology by Skoranek and those have definitely shaped the way that we teach piracy. When I teach piracy in classes here at Oxford in tutorials, the way that we look at it is by recognizing that we need to take a step back and question whether or not the sources that we are looking at, especially if we're looking at classical sources, are taking up the viewpoints of peoples that potentially were working on the outside bounds of what was actually being documented. And so I think when we talk about like specifically like geographic areas or like diagnostic features of what we are looking at when we're looking for piracy, I think the modern scholarship has definitely pervaded the academic communities, and at least how it's taught now is, I agree, definitely better than it was before. But of course has a ways to go.
Thank you, Leah. Is anyone wants to answer to that question?
No, but I think I would follow that with just saying that Skoranek and Ewan's work as a concerted effort to study piracy, to bring it into into the light as something that's not just this romantic idea of maritime lore, that's what draws people to it. We see it with a lot of the students that come in. They come in with the idea of wanting to study piracy, and then very quickly realize that there's so many other things that you can explore. But I think projects like the Queen Anne's Revenge project, which has produced so much material culture, has allowed us to sort of expand this idea of piracy into something beyond just this romantic idea. So I think really a lot of credit is due to Charlie Ewan and Russ Skowronek for sort of pushing this forward with 3 volumes of pirate archaeology, so.
And speaking of which Russell Skowronek was not able to join, but he's very sorry to not be able to be here. So he sent his warmest regards to everyone and hope that we are going to have a good time. So thank you, Jason. Is anyone wants to follow on what he said or answer the question? Otherwise, we are going to be able to go to the second one. So still in the introduction of our panel, since many people in the audience may be curious but not specialists, could you start by outlining the main timeline and geographic areas relevant to your research? So that's more personal question. Could you cite us some example of sites or historical study? So whenever you want. Yes, Jean? Attends.
Le son. Okay. It's okay? Yes. But for the period chronology, it's simple. It's a golden age of piracy between the second half of the 7th century and the early 19th century, 18th century. Sorry. Well, it's a name of period. It's not really really. It's not already historical fact. It's just a period name to understand for all people. For the geographic zone, you have just 2 zones, but also the 2 principal zones: Caribbean space, maritime space, and east coast of America, and also Indian Ocean. For the research around Madagascar, of course, and precisely for our study the Sainte Marie Island in the pirate layers of piracy. In very interesting because you have the settlement, maritime settlements with pirates, occupation, and the shipwreck in the same space. It's very unique sites for archaeology of piracy, I think so.
Perfect. Is anyone wants to follow?
Yeah, I mean there are many ways to think about piracy, right? I think it's easy to see it defined by what we all have this Pirates of the Caribbean or something, but and in fact I think piracy is a much more it's a maritime activity. It's something that people could engage in and not necessarily identify as a pirate, right? Maybe they get away with something. So I think it's a really broad topic when you really think about it. But those sites that are very specific that we think of, like Port Royal or Madagascar, that you think of pirate settlements and Roatan and places like that. I think it's really interesting. For us here in North Carolina, we have a lore that goes back because this was a place that these individuals, Stede Bonnet and Blackbeard, could basically hide out in the sounds and sort of get lost a little bit. So I think there's these little enclaves, these places in the world. But I think, again, I'll go back to Ewan and Skowronek's work and how they've been able to sort of help us understand that people like Jean Lafitte in Louisiana, he was a pirate, but he was sort of as we from Louisiana like to think, he's maybe more like a Robin Hood of pirates, So I think it's an interesting it's such a broad brush, right? To think about it. My particular research sort of centered around some work in Bermuda, but also now I'm becoming more involved with material culture studies from Queen Anne's Revenge. So
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, Mike, you want to follow? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's good to follow what Jason just said. So the area that I've been focused on for the last 15 or so years of just research has really been the Gulf of Mexico. And I've studied a period of piracy that came actually about 100 years after where most people focus their study on, which is, the golden age of piracy. I look at piracy during what's called the Age of Revolutions in the Americas. So I have an article that looks at piracy and privateering from the American Revolutionary War and their involvement in the slave trade. Speaking of the Lafitte brothers, they're known for, in the United States, kind of in popular history, they're known for saving New Orleans during the War of 1812, which is kind of questionable whether they actually really had a big role in that. But then, of course, they're also known as being pirates. But what I always try to tell people is they should be known just as much for their involvement in the slave trade, just like a lot of pirates were involved in the slave trade. So I focused on from basically 1775 when it started in the Americas, and primarily in the Gulf region is where I focused on, but also in the Caribbean and a little on the Atlantic side, on the eastern coast of Florida. But my most recent article that I published looked at a case of piracy that came to St. Bart's in 1829. So that age of revolutions and the explosion of pirate activity and privateering in the Gulf and Caribbean lasted for about 50 years in the late 18th, early 19th century until it kind of petered off in the 1830s. And what I found is that they simply were going where the opportunity was. And then when that opportunity in that particular area wasn't there anymore, they just moved. And so that's where most of my focus is on, though, is Gulf of Mexico, Age of Revolutions.
Great, thank you. Is anyone wants to talk? Otherwise, we can keep on going. So still in our part into the introduction of the archaeology of piracy. The archaeology of piracy often brings to mind images of treasure hunting. So we talked a bit about that earlier, which can blur the line between scientific research and popular myth. So how do you navigate you personally into the distinction between serious archaeological work and the more Pirates of the Caribbean figure of the treasure hunter? And so what is like the perception that exists not only in piracy-related archaeology, but in the fields more broadly today? Yes, Charles.
Well, in my case, working on the Captain Kidd pirate ship of the Caribbean, we'd like to say the only academically studied pirate ship, at least among the only ones, was a treasure hunt before we got involved in it from 2005, 2007. So not only do you have the concept of treasure hunting, looking for a pirate ship of Captain Kidd, but then ultimately it goes on with our research to turn it into a permanent living museum in the sea, now a park that's protected. But I think what was important when we got involved in this, having seen the $1.2 million treasure hunt documents, and they spent 2 years and couldn't find the site, when I was showing and went with that time my graduate student, Fritz Hanselman, who wanted to work on the piracy, I thought, well, how are we going to do this? How is it going to be accepted to do a PhD on piracy, a pirate ship? So it was really important that the scientific investigation occurred and that the permanent site or the site be established as a permanent park to be protected rather than treasure hunted. So the scientific investigation of the tectona, the teak wood, the tectona grandis, the kids' testimonies of how the ship was constructed, unique construction of gluing together from Soulat, India, of this teak, and then the ballast stones that were from, at the time I had no idea, but the Trop had a very unique signature of basalts. It enabled us to really identify the ship and utilize that scientific investigation to ward off the treasure hunting for the future. I told the government, you know, you can turn it back to the treasure hunters. We've all worked on lots of sites that have been treasure hunted and still managed to do some work on them, or you can let it be permanently protected as a scientific investigation site and ultimately a park site. Cultural material, people have talked about, we have very little with the small amount of wood sample, the ballast stone sample, and then the archival records enabled us to also then do in situ preservation without trying to bring up more than, we had one canon of 26 that was conserved. So I think it really, to me, the perception of treasure hunting can be really stopped by doing good academics and good scientific investigations and making these sites permanently protected, so for public benefit.
Yeah, that seems the best option. I think so also. Is anyone who wants to follow to what Dr. Beeker said or ask the question another way? Yes, Connie?
I think as well, can you hear me? Yeah. I think as well, by publishing the scientific work and reaching out and giving talks and I suppose breaking that concept of, you know, rogues and the Hollywood-esque view of piracy, and really talking about the period that they represent, the men themselves, their families, the people they encountered, and showing how the archaeological work can inform us about that. Really kind of shows that if you do something scientifically, you can get far more information and put all the jigsaw together instead of just having missing pieces through non-scientific approaches. So it's in a way, archaeology is the publication, particularly afterwards, and spreading the word on doing the archaeology of piracy is really breaking that myth while still retaining that adventurous lure of piracy. That's not being lost. It's just we're now presenting it in a different way, I think.
Yes, Jean?
Yes, like Connie and Charles, it's a conflict between, it's a war between the scientist and treasure hunter. Treasure hunter not published, yeah. Take artifacts, search artifacts, gold coins, but other artifacts without the context. The archaeological context is very, very important to know, to show the history of sites. And the treasure hunter, it's not a real searcher. It's just a finder of artifacts, a finder of sites, probably, but not a researcher. And the context. When you talk about when you talk with a treasure hunter, they people don't understand the context. It's in the fact and not public, not scientific. Okay, I think so.
Okay, thank you, Jean. I think maybe for the introduction, we are going to be good. If anyone wants to add something later, don't hesitate, even if it's for another question. Still at the end, we will have a time for question and answer for people that are invited, not the panelists, but for everyone. So we are going to start to ask more about specific question about the archaeology and piracy. And the first one is about the material culture and the sites. So what are the most diagnostic archaeological signatures of pirate activity? And how can we distinguish them from those of naval and merchant vessels of the same period? More focus about material culture here. Yes, Connie?
From the piracy that I study in the Atlantic in the south coast of Ireland, some of the sites I'm coming across, which are notoriously difficult to date, are very remote rock-cut steps and platforms on islands, particularly, but also in coastal areas on the mainland, but very much out of the way. In small maybe inlets or harbors that they don't readily stand out as being legitimate docking stations because they are so remote. The one thing that some of them might have is that they might be sources of fresh water for all mariners. And no doubt they were used by all mariners for that, including pirates. But some of the steps, particularly one set of steps where on the flat rock face, 2 lantern niches have been cut out so that the ships could be, or the small boats from the pirate ships could be navigate in using the lights at nighttime. So to me, they very much smack of illicit activity and the crossover between piracy and smuggling. But I'm only beginning to look at these sites and I haven't come up, and they must be there with other sites that have these light niches or whatever. So I'd be really open to anybody else if they've come across something like that. But for me, in the landscape that I'm studying, that very much signals illicit activity. Because these steps were cut in a place that would only facilitate contraband goods coming in out of sight and out of mind. So that's rather than the ships themselves. That's what I've come across in my studies. Thanks.
Thank you, Connie. So, yeah, Mike, you want to speak?
Yeah, sure. And so the latest version of the Archaeology of Piracy books, I had a good opportunity to co-author a chapter just on this subject, actually. So again, kind of looking from United States perspective, Gulf of Mexico, that Age of Revolutions period. So geographically, that's where I'm at. But yeah, it's very, very difficult is what we found. And so basically what we did is we wanted to look at the documentary record to see if in the documents, if we could find any reference to some sort of specific material culture that was associated with pirates during this time period. And my co-author, Jess Craig, and I, basically, we were very fortunate because in the United States, we have lots of documentation. And that's primarily because piracy, after the U.S. Constitution was signed, was a federal crime. And when you get into the early part of the 19th century, so by 1819, the United States government actually established by an act of Congress a squadron of naval ships whose one main job was to be basically an anti-piracy patrol. It was called the West Indies Squadron or the West India Squadron. It was originally based in Key West, what they used to call Thompson's Key, which is named after the Secretary of Navy at the time. But by 1825, the yellow fever was so bad that they decided to move the squadron. So they actually relocated the squadron in 1826 to Pensacola. So Pensacola's naval, we're known for naval aviation, but our Navy actually began with the founding of the West Indies Squadron home base. And this was where we're at. But that all is to say that they were a very active squadron. This was a squadron of warships, sloops, schooners. They even had some of the frigates from the U.S. frigates were actually involved in these campaigns against piracy during this time period. But they captured a lot of people, hundreds of people. And where these cases were tried were in federal courts all across the United States. One of the big areas that they would try cases, they actually tried 2 different federal cases here in Pensacola, but most of the pirates that were captured were tried in places like New Orleans, New York, Savannah, bigger cities. But what's really interesting is we have those court cases. We have just in New Orleans alone about 400 federal court cases of piracy from this 20-year time period. And when you go and look in those documents, some of these court records, like in Pensacola, there was a case here in 1822, a group of 18 Spanish accused pirates were captured off the coast of Cuba, and they were brought here to Pensacola and tried in a federal. We had a federal court here. And I found those records, and there's only 4 documents in that box. There were just 4, and it was like the affidavit and basically the bail. They actually gave 2 of the captain and the first mate. They bailed them out of jail, and then the jury's verdict. So it was a very small number of documents. But one of the documents that I found there was very interesting, and it was an inventory of all the items that they had captured from that pirate ship. And if you look at that inventory, it would the material culture that they had really looked no different than like a Cuban fisherman. And we actually know quite a bit about Cuban fishermen because we had fishing ranchos on the southwest coast of Florida. These are Cuban fishermen that were going from Regla, Cuba, up into Florida for a couple seasons just to fish, and then they go back and sell everything they caught in Havana. So we have a good idea of what that material culture looks like. And if you look at that inventory, it looks very, very similar. We have other cases, though, again, hundreds of cases that also have these inventories of pirates that they had captured. And so, again, looking at a lot of those, it's very difficult to be able to tell the difference between a Cuban fisherman or a naval vessel or a merchant ship, because during this time period, because of the explosion of this illicit crime taking place, it was not uncommon for merchantmen to carry armaments. I mean, we know that merchantmen were arming themselves for protection. So just because a pirate was armed or just because a sailor was armed, wasn't necessarily something that prosecutors could use to convince a jury that they were guilty of piracy, because it could have been just for defensive purposes. And that's another area that we looked into is, based on witness testimony, based on the prosecution, based on what these naval commanders who were capturing these pirates, accused pirates, and bringing them to court, what were they using as evidence to get a conviction? And if you look at like things like clothing, right? I mean, there's this trope, like there's popular myth about what pirates wore, like a pirate uniform or whatever. But when you look at the actual records in these court cases and these testimonies, you just don't see that. People aren't saying like, oh yeah, he had a pirate jacket on. No, what they're describing is physical features. Like, I saw that guy with a scar across his face or a specific tattoo do this crime. And that's what they use as evidence, not what they were wearing. So the only really material evidence that they referenced in a case that I found was the Jolly Roger, the red flag. That was actually in the one case I mentioned here in Pensacola in 1823, the naval commander, Captain Stephen Casson of the USS Peacock, he actually wrote the prosecutor in New Orleans and said, hey, they had a lot of guns, so we think you could use that. He said, the other thing we got that the smoking gun, though, was we found the red flag. They had the red flag. So, but again, finding that archaeologically, I think would be very difficult. But there is a lot of we saw a lot of interesting kind of parallels between these U.S. squadrons capturing Cuban, fishing vessels and claiming that they were just doing that undercover, that they were using that as cover, that they were actually pirates. And that may have been true to some extent, but it's interesting too, if you look into the 1830s, the U.S. government is making the same accusations about these Cuban fishing ranchos, except instead of accusing them of being pirates, they're saying they're smuggling weapons to help the Seminoles fight the United States government. So there seems, I think for me, what's interesting about this is the geopolitics and the formation of the nation state. And, it seems that to me, based on my research, there was a difference between what the governments were saying about these individuals. And then when you look at actual communities where they were living in, when some of these individuals were caught and thrown into jail, for example, in New Orleans, it was the community that was busting them out of prison. So like, it seems like there's a disconnect between what the mass media at the time, the press was saying about these individuals, and the governments that were pursuing charges against them. but then the actual communities that they lived in. And to me, that's a really interesting aspect, maybe even more so than finding a alleged buried treasure. But yeah, it's very, very difficult, very hard.
Thank you, Mike. So what you said just might also answer another question I had. So we'll come back to that after. Is anyone wants to follow what Mike said or answer in a different way? Yes, Jean?
Yes, sorry. For me, first, it's a globalization of material culture. In Sainte Marie, Madagascar, our excavations, in shipwreck and settlement, we have a different artifacts from the world. We have a Chinese porcelain, very quantities, and Kulal ceramic, Kulal potteries from India, gold coins from a different origin in Europe, India, Arabic, Mediterranean basin, etc. We have a Chinese ware, European ware, clay pipes, tobacco pipes from Netherlands, Scotland, etc., etc., etc. It's very interesting to know these different for different artifacts, for different categories. We have a different provenance, and it's revealed for me the exchange, the interlope activity of piracy in a world and in Indian Ocean, of course, but the connection between Asia and Europe, and the connection between Asia, Indian Ocean, and New England, Caribbean, etc. It's archaeology of globalization for me.
Okay, thank you, Jean. Leah, you want to say something?
Yes. Yeah, I agree with what Mike was saying. I think definitely a lot of it is quite tricky, and it ends up, I think, you and Skrana come up with these really great frameworks where you can look at things like staging sites, and you can look at things that could be potentially subversive, indicative of potentially subversive activity. But I think at the end of the day, it comes down to identity, which is more or less what he was alluding to. And it's not just identity, it's like the identity of the pirate itself, right? Because you have the nation state that is always going to have a motive, right, of proclaiming someone as a pirate. So it really comes down to whether or not the person themselves indicates themselves to be a pirate, or they see themselves as a pirate. And otherwise, they could just be acting against the state, and that could be potentially untrue. The things that a state is proclaiming. So it really comes down to, I think for me, it came down to when I was looking at piracy in like religious groups, it came down to documentation that corroborated material culture evidence. And that was the only thing I felt like I could definitively prove that someone was or was not considering themselves a pirate.
Great. Thank you, Leah. Is anyone wants to follow what Leah said or answer in a different way? Otherwise, I have a following question, so we can start with that. So, still in this idea of material and artifacts, I'm not even sure that my question is, as I'm not a specialist in archaeology and piracy, don't hesitate to say that the questions are not really like relevant or something like that. How did pirates adapt or appropriate material culture from all captured vessels or ports where they would be in? And what does this tell us about their consumption, identity, and the living with the people there?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think if I understand the question, that I think there's the idea that how do you distinguish a piratical activity on board a vessel that might have been captured, for instance. And I think Queen Anne's Revenge is probably a very good example of this. It operated as a slaving vessel beforehand and was really only a quote unquote pirate vessel for, like 18 months or something like that. So the idea that you would be able to distinguish between, those activities is maybe a little bit tricky. So I think to unravel that, it goes back to what Mike said. I mean, armed merchant vessels of the time period, so without the historical record, it makes it very tricky to try to identify, from an archaeological assemblage, underwater. You might say that you find a wreck in a place like Ile Saint-Marie or in, North Carolina, and you might be able to unravel these things. But again, it's association. So in the case of Queen Anne's Revenge, for instance, we've had some students in the last few years studying specific tools and things like navigation instruments and trying to trace records from the slaving vessel and how do we find other things on board that might have been brought on board, that do not seem to fit with what we would expect to be in that initial assemblage. So, Queen Anne's Revenge was La Concorde out of Nantes, and so it was overtaken, and so we don't know exactly what Blackbeard and the crew would have taken on board. We know that many individuals on board that ship were impressed into service or joined, however you want to see it. But again, it's interesting because you think about the slaving aspect of it, and that in and of itself is this, is an activity that while it was sanctioned, it was also probably not seen as necessarily, an activity that everyone wanted to be involved with. So yeah, I think it's really tricky, Iness. I think to think about material culture, sites like Connie's talking about, I think when you think about a landscape and perhaps you see, evidence in a landscape that can tell you that associates this larger kind of concept of how pirates might have been using, specific regions, or, Jean works in Ile Saint-Marie and off Madagascar. In those areas, we know they were, used for careenage, but we know also that they were supposedly sympathetic to to pirate reprovisioning. So I don't know. I think it's a really good question, and I think it's a tricky question to just really be able to say that just from material culture that you can distinguish this. So thanks. Sorry.
Thank you, Jason. So yeah, Connie, you want to answer?
Yeah, I would agree with what all the previous panelists said there. I think certainly the benefit of historical documentation and trying to glue that into what you're looking for within the landscape is a big bonus if you can have that. And again, just drawing on some examples of my work in the southwest coast of Ireland, where I had the benefit of tracking down an actual map that was drafted by the Dutch for the pirate harbours of southwest Cork, and then also a list of cargo that came off one of the pirate ships and who was waiting on the quays in a particular site to collect those and where they went to. And that kind of, I went down then and at low water, and I looked at those places that had no archaeological references to anything in the intertidal zone, and lo and behold, I found these evidence of early quays, mooring, stones, all of that, and even Mediterranean ware in the intertidal zone from the 17th century. So it's like, again, like I said at the start, to me anyway, it's like I said there at the start, it's like a puzzle. And if you can get all the little pieces together and look at it from an activity within a landscape, then perhaps the ships will start to make more sense too, because you're following the track of the ships and where they went to. The same pirate who left the list of goods that he offloaded lost a ship in that area, and we may have that ship now because we came across a wreck in 2012. And I was interested in what Jeanne said earlier about the teak, because it looks like it's exotic timbers as well from the ship. But it may not be that ship, but or that wreck. But I think it's a little puzzle that we all work together to try to put together and make sense of the activity itself, and then the people behind that activity. And landscape to me is a big identifier if we can place the piracy within that landscape. Thanks.
Thank you, Connie. Does anyone want to keep going on that question or answer differently? If we're good, we can go on. Still in more like a global context, how does piracy, so as we said, the landscape can be very different, but more particular, how does piracy in the Caribbean can be compared to the archaeology where Jean and Yann and Alexandre will work, or where in Ireland where Connie is going to work? So yeah, how can we compare those kind of archaeology? Because typically it's not the same study, like it's kind of different. Does anyone want to answer to that? Charles, do you want to say something about that?
Well, of course, the Captain Kidd vessel was captured off Soulat, India, with marauding there, had gone to St. Marie in Madagascar, and then sailed back into the Caribbean, and ultimately was abandoned with hopes to go back to the site, according to Captain Kidd's testimony at his trial in 1701. So, that the Quetta Merchant, owned by the Armenians, built in Soulat, India, ended up being in the Indian Ocean, captured, but ultimately a shipwreck in the Caribbean. So I guess my context for that would be the minimal archaeology we did to prove the site, as I've already mentioned. Cultural material is minimal on that site after the proof, and rather we're leaving it for as an underwater permanent protected area today. So that'd be my stab at what you're asking there. But my vessel's in the Caribbean, but it started in the Indian Ocean. So.
Okay, yeah. So does anyone want to keep on that question, talking about the comparison between the archaeology in different contexts, archaeology of piracy in different contexts? Like, Leah, do you have something? Oh yeah, Connie, sure.
I wouldn't be the expert on on that area of the world, but I think from what I do know, I have similarities in the Atlantic in the form of knowledge networks, and building up. You had individuals who were able to know what was happening when it was happening and facilitated the pirates themselves, and they themselves had the knowledge of what they were bringing in, of course, and when they were bringing it in. So I think in knowledge networks, and that ties into the whole maritime networks, is where the similarity could be found as well. If there's evidence of something like there is in the southwest coast of Ireland, where you had individual pirates who, there's one term I came across a few times, they had the knowledge and they were able to go ahead and tell those waiting on shore what was going to be coming in, when it was coming in, and who was bringing it in. So to me, that the knowledge networks is very key to the success of a pirate operation, because you know ahead who's on shore and if they can bring in the goods. So, and if it's safe to go ashore. So there could be parallels there in that kind of thing.
Okay, good. Thank you, Connie. Does anyone want to follow on the question? Yes, Mike.
Yeah, again, for my specific area, that's a really interesting question, is to say like archaeology. I think we, again, through the documentary record, we can certainly make some of those comparisons that have already been mentioned, specifically for cargo, right? Because they're basically capturing what's on merchant ships that are sailing these different routes in whatever geographic area. But I think it'd be really interesting to look at the comparison again to this Age of Revolutions time period. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of there's not really been any identified that are definitely from this time period. There's a couple potential ones. I know there's a Mardi Gras shipwreck that I think the most recent belief is that it may have been an American privateer ship during the War of 1812, although I don't think that there's been any really conclusive evidence of that. There's also the Monterey shipwrecks that were discovered about 10 years ago in the Gulf of Mexico off the coast of Texas. And there was some speculation that they may have been pirate ships from this period, 1820s, 1830s. And then the only other one that I'm aware of from this time period in this region, and if anyone knows of any more, please let me know, is the Spanish pirate slaver Guerrero that wrecked in the Florida Keys in 1827. And the Mel Fisher Museum, they think that they may have found the location working with a group called Diving with a Purpose, but I'm not totally convinced of that. I think one of the challenges is it's in really shallow water. I think the only material evidence that they've found so far has been like a few, ballast stone, a demijohn bottle, some ceramics. But the Guerrero had over 600 enslaved people on board on that ship, and several dozen of them drowned when it hit the reef. And then, I would think that if it had been that, you would expect to find shackles, slave ship shackles, like the Henrietta Marie had on board as well. So it's an interesting question. I don't think, in terms of my regional area that I've focused on, we can really answer that yet. But I think hopefully there will be more work and more wrecks from that time period that we might be able to get a good comparison, good sample from the Gulf.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. Does anyone want to keep on that question?
I might just say that, clearly, like, geopolitics is a big part of what's going to, tell us what, sort of pirate activities are. So I think instead, again, it goes back to that idea that, Charlie and Russ, or sorry, Ewan and Skowronek, are trying to create this idea of a larger study, a project to study piracy, and then to be able to extrapolate themes out of that, that we could then apply within those regions. I think that's where that sort of thematic structure of like, what is the archaeology of piracy, is developing. So yeah, I think it's hard to say that piracy in Asia is going to be the same as it's going to be in the Caribbean as it's going to be in the Indian Ocean. So, but instead, maybe we see these larger themes. So.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, for answering to that. Leah, you want to say something?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Jason. I think when we start to apply those frameworks, which I think are really excellent, I think the most important thing for me when looking at different geographic areas was the political motivations that would be specific to each area, and also the geographic advantages, which I think archaeologists now are getting. We're much better at implementing technologies like GIS and LiDAR, and understanding how those geographic advantages of every area would affect how I think you're really trying to understand why people would go to certain places, and we're trying to understand where would be the best spot for someone to go based on the current political pressures that they would be facing. And so for me, those were the kind of frameworks and concepts that were important to me, and those would be different when I was looking at an Ottoman pirate in the Mediterranean versus looking at a religious group that had a pirate activity in the Caribbean in a completely different century. And so understanding those concepts and what drove them, like the push-pull mechanisms of piracy, is really what gave me a better answer in terms of how to compare. But it's those overarching frameworks, so I definitely agree with that.
Thank you, Leah. Does anyone want to say something about that? Otherwise, we can keep on going. So I have a question for much more personal interest. What can we say about their shipwreck today, or about their ship? What is the documentation? Sorry, I'm starting to kind of be tired. What is the documentation we can have on those ship? Which one are they going to sail on, and about the shipwrecks today? What can we find? Does anyone have to as an answer for that? Like Yann, as you work a lot on those shipwrecks. From speaker.
Yes, I worked a lot on shipwrecks, but not specifically on pirate shipwrecks. So I worked on pirate shipwreck in Mauritius and in Madagascar, but up to now we did not do any comparative study between different shipwrecks. We worked mainly on artifacts, compare artifacts from one pirate shipwreck to another, but not the structure itself. And I'm happy to learn that there are some shipwrecks which teak wood, because our problem is that we have a ship which is entirely made of teak, and we have to find which shipwreck it is. So it's not much research has to be done in archives and in the history of all these ships. And as you know, pirates don't do reports, and this is our problem. So we have only reports of those who were witnesses, but not from the pirates themselves. So it's not an easy, I would say, not an easy subject to research, because we have not enough information in archives. But we know we have some candidates here and there, but it would be interesting to make comparative studies between shipwrecks of piracy. I think Jean, he did a little bit work on that.
Thank you, Yann. Mike want to speak, so I'm going to let him. And Jean, if you have something to say to follow what Yann said, you're good after. Mike?
Yeah, again, there's not a whole lot of confirmed pirate ships, so it's hard to say. But we can look at the documentary record. And so several years ago, I wrote a piece looking again at the American and British privateer ships that were involved in the American Revolutionary War, specifically their role in the illicit slave trade that was taking place during that time period. And I kept an Excel spreadsheet of every name of the ship, the captain, the year, the number of enslaved people, the cargo. I have a whole spreadsheet, and I also had vessel type. And in almost every case that I found, it was a schooner. And so I've also looked at other court cases. Again, we have several hundred just in New Orleans. There's other cases too that take place in the United States against piracy. And again, predominantly what I've seen is sloops and schooners. It tended to be the type of vessel that was used in this activity. I did actually several years ago came across a pirate ship log. There was a pirate named William Augustus Bowles that started a pirate base out of Apalachicola, and that he was basically attacking Spanish shipping along the Gulf Coast. Now, most of his pirate ships were just attacking Spanish fishermen. So most of the vessels that they were capturing were just Spanish fishermen. But again, every one of his ships, if you look at the type, it was a schooner. So you might say that, well, the pirates obviously preferred the schooner. However, if you look at the most common type of craft that was operating in the Gulf during this time period, it was a schooner. Merchants, naval vessels, slavers, and pirates were picking schooners. So I don't know if it was just that the pirates preferred this type of craft, or if it was just like in general, mariners just prefer this in this region, in this area, because that was the most effective type of vessel to have, regardless of what maritime trade you were involved in the Gulf and Caribbean during that time period. If that answers your question, I think that's kind of what your question was.
Yeah, totally. So needs to know now if schooners are the best choice or not. Perfect. Thank you, Mike.
Actually, in Mauritius, we have a lot of amount of schooners and even luggers, and they were mainly used for slave trade. So if a pirate took a slave ship, probably he took, of course, you can take a schooner or a lugger, but they were very preferred because these kind of ship were able to enter river mouths and go near to the coast, and they could easily hide somewhere near the land. You see, if you have a big ship, it was far more difficult to hide it. Whereas all the small schooners and luggers, it was easy to. Actually, they were even faster than other ships, and this is perhaps why it was preferred.
Yes, Connie. Thank you, Yann.
Yeah, I was very fortunate as well in the period that I was looking at from the first half of the 17th century. Captain Henry Mannering, who was a pirate at the time himself, was pardoned eventually, and in gratitude to the king, he wrote a discourse, and within it he has 5 chapters in his discourse, and one of them is on ships, and he states that the pirates had a preference for the Dutch fleeboot, or flyboat, and he gives the reasons for it. Again, as Yann said there, they were very maneuverable, they were fast, they were small enough to hide behind islands, they could strike very quickly. So it kind of gives you an idea of the type of wreck you might come across that might be lost in the area from that period. So I think the historical documents can give you this information if you're lucky, but not always, unfortunately. But yeah, they do exist.
Thank you, Connie. Yes, Jason.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's it's like horses for courses, right? It's where are you sailing? What are you doing? Undoubtedly, with privateers, you want to be able to sail close to the wind. You want to sail close to the shore. You want something that's fast. You attack quickly. Whereas if you're an ocean-going vessel, like to think that Queen Anne's Revenge again, as a frigate, it's a large 3-masted ship. It's going to be something that's much more far-ranging. It's going to be something that's able to take on much larger outfits and therefore sail longer as needed. So I really do think, like, again, we start to see these things, like what exactly are the activities that we're discussing, and what are the areas they're working in, et cetera, et cetera. I think, yeah, undoubtedly, it's so hard to say, like, this was a pirate ship, it was a 3-masted ship, or it was a schooner, or it was, because you're going to have such a variation based on, sort of environmental conditions that they expect to encounter, and where they're sailing, how long they're sailing. So yeah, I think it just feels like it's still almost in its infancy, even though it's been studied now for many years, but there's so much more to learn. And I think the historical records undoubtedly are going to be the key to all of it, right? So
A good thing to know. Thank you, Jason. Does anyone wants to follow that question? We good? Yeah? Okay. So much more interdisciplinary question about method and technologies. So for today, as it's more and more in the what we can see on the fields, how are new technologies, particularly in archaeology and underwater archaeology, being used today, and to what extent do they benefit the study of piracy? And are there specific tools or methods that have significantly advanced research in this area? And I know that perhaps Charlie, you have worked a lot in recent time about that. So do you want to? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, certainly it's the technology, the scientific investigations I've alluded to earlier that identified the Quedagh Merchant, which was captured off of Soulat, India. So the question became, how could we really tell the ship was what the treasure hunters had been looking for, spent $1.2 million, did not find. And I've still kind of questioned what happened there. I don't want to mention Bert Weber's name, but it just seemed pretty ironic that he couldn't talk to people, the local fishermen and all. We knew the ship was somewhere on Catalina Island. Armenians had been there with 2,000 Armenians in 2005 in a cruise boat because they knew the ship was somewhere on the island. But at any rate, it was the vessels comprised the site, a stack of cannons and a cargo hold. We worked with National Geographic to fund this particular first round of the project. And they asked, are we going to find any wood? And I said, well, I doubt it. It's in, half a meter to 3 meters of water, high energy zone, cannon piled up, but no, probably no wood. And then we found a significant amount of wood because it was, again, Tectona grandis, teak. And when I first saw this particular site, it was uncovered and had East Carolina University faculty and students with us in that particular round. It was just shocking to me to see the way it was glued together. I'd never seen ship constructed in that manner, and I'm kind of curious, Yann, on your teak vessel, similar construction style, where the British documented that archival records we have that Joseph Splinter in 1756 said he watched them building ships in Bombay, and they would take the teak wood and they would put the plank on plank and put a litmus on it and pull it back off and put the red litmus again, and they do this so many multiple times that ultimately the seam was virtually invisible. And then for no particular scientific reason, after they glued the seam, they would nail it with iron nails on the inside. And so the ghosted nails, the Tectona teak, the teak wood, the construction of a glued ship rather than your standard European style of caulking with horsehair and tar really told us a lot. But then further than that was the testimony by Captain Kidd himself about the seams being all rabbited and in his trial testimony 1701. And then ultimately, as I mentioned, the thin sectioning of the ballast stones. I've tried that on multiple shipwrecks and not had success, but in this case, the elemental makeup of the basalts was absolutely from a unique outcropping of Deccan Trop outside of Surat, India, where the ballast stones originated. So I had teak wood from Surat, India to Malaysia. We had the construction style, and then we had the elemental makeup of the stones, which gave us the scientific proof that we had the Captain Kidd shipwreck. So without that science, we just have another pile of cannons there. We might surmise it, but we don't have the ship's bell. But we certainly have the scientific evidence, which is new technology, to be able to prove that. And to me, that's very exciting to be able to add that. And backing up as far as pirate ships go, I think that the pirate ship ownership is really a question of opportunity. In this case, Captain Kidd was a privateer that was later accused of piracy. So I'm not sure I can say the Quedagh Merchant was a pirate ship. But certainly he was hanged for piracy May 23rd of 1701. But the ship itself was just a larger vessel. It was in good condition, the teak wood, whereas Adventure Galley, he burned off St. Mary Island in Madagascar because in 3 years it was virtually starting to sink. So I'm not sure you can say what a pirate ship is. We have lots of other examples of you capturing a vessel and switching over to that ship in better condition. So I think the vessels themselves are an opportunity of the people that are capturing is whether it's a better vessel and better suited to what they want to do.
Perfect. Thank you, Charlie. Alexandre, you want to say something?
Oui, par contre, je veux bien que tu fasses la traduction. Ça sera mieux.
Aucun problème.
Considérant l'utilisation des nouvelles technologies, il y a quelque chose qui a quand même beaucoup évolué depuis 15 ans, c'est c'est l'utilisation, on va dire, presque intensive de la photogrammétrie, qui nous apporte énormément de choses, et pour le sous-marin, pour le relevé des épaves, puisque ça nous permet de faire des relevés tridimensionnels, de pouvoir revenir en quelque sorte sur le site alors qu'on n'est plus sous l'eau, d'avoir plus de précision qu'un simple plan, qui est déjà une interprétation du relevé, mais aussi pour d'autres choses. Par exemple, nous, à Madagascar, on a fait la même chose pour le terrestre. Ça nous permet d'augmenter la précision des relevés, et ça vaut aussi pour les objets, et en particulier pour les objets issus du subaquatique et qui présentent des problématiques de conservation, surtout sur certains matériaux qui se dégradent très vite. Nous, pour Madagascar, on n'a pas les moyens de sortir les objets du territoire. Et donc, du coup, la réalisation de relevés photogrammétriques à très haute définition nous permet d'avoir une copie numérique, un jumeau numérique de l'épave, du site terrestre, mais aussi des objets.
Okay. So Alexandre said that for the past 15 years, the massive use of photogrammetry is one of the best thing we can use on the study of shipwreck. Because it's a way to go back on site even if you are not on it. So to work afterward, even if you are not in the country. And as he said, they worked a lot on a shipwreck in Madagascar, and they are not able to take all the stuff up because of legacy because of the law. And so the photogrammetry helps them to have a very precise way to study the material and the site, even if they can't be on it. So thank you, Alexandre, for that. Est-ce que tu veux que je rajoute quelque chose?
Dernière chose. Pour les objets, ça nous permet, entre autres sur des objets qui vont faire moins d'une dizaine de centimètres, voire même encore plus petits, par exemple pour la taille d'une pipe, avec un matériel qui est finalement très léger, un appareil photo hybride ou réflexe de très haut niveau, de pouvoir faire une copie, un jumeau numérique qui va nous permettre de descendre à 1 mm de précision, voire de faire apparaître des traces d'utilisation, de fabrication, chose qui est déjà compliquée de dessiner à la main, surtout quand on est dessinateur. Ça prend énormément de temps et ça reste qu'une interprétation, alors que là, on va se rapprocher au plus proche de la réalité.
So Alexandre is saying that one of the thing that is very good with the photogrammetry is even for very small is the precision. So even with very small object like pipe of like 10 centimeters pipe is we can be precise as almost 1 millimeter. So it can show marks that we can't see with the eyes. So it's very important. Photogrammetry is very important in archaeology, in underwater archaeology today. So yeah. Perfect. Thank you, Alexandre. Merci.
Merci.
Does anyone wants to keep on? Yes, Charlie.
Yeah, I have to second that photogrammetric modeling. Our university was very early in that procedures and have used it very successfully, but I also want to mention we're using it not only just to monitor the shipwreck itself, but the associated biology of the sites. And these parks and preserves we've established as living museums. We now have, I just came back from the Captain Kidd site 4 days ago, and we're doing a new model on it that we're comparing to our models we've done previously in 2015, 2018. But we're looking at the corals nearby and being able to monitor the site as a archaeological integrity, but also the biological integrity, which according to the Abandoned Shipwreck Act, our shipwrecks are in equilibrium in the environment. So all of us archaeologists need to think about that environmental consideration of the shipwreck and using your modeling, not just for the wreck itself, but nearby, particularly on sites that are being opened up, in our case, for public visitation as a strategy for protection of the sites. Not maybe feasible on all sites, but the Captain Kidd is a park. And now it's a snorkeling diving site with a nearby wall with, I just looked at 8 stands of black coral we've been monitoring now for almost 14 years. And the nearby dendrogyras, and which have only one was still tissue alive, but our palmatus, the elkhorn corals, all are critically endangered species that are part of that shipwreck park. So photogrammetric modeling of the biology, I want to throw that out for all us archaeologists.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's very important for archaeologists today to think about the sites, the context in our archaeological sites, but also to think about the environment and what it is around. So yeah, thank you, Charlie, for that. Does anyone want to keep on that question? Yes, Leah.
I think something that I think is important to mention, just much more simply, is just keeping a digital and accessible archive of all of these great things that we're finding, and actually uploading to something that is accessible to other people. I mean, this is a technology. It's not necessarily new, but the fact that we can house these massive databases, I think, is actually where we're going to start finding, when we talk about trying to find geographical comparisons between different areas and seeing how archaeology in one place can be looked at similarly or differently to another place. I mean, that's how we're going to be able to do that, because to fly all over the world to look at archives and catalogs in each area is not feasible. But to put all of these great models and stuff online for people to see and access and use, that's where we're actually going to get some cross, country disciplinary collaboration. So I think that's a technology that I don't know if we use to the full extent that it can be.
Thank you, Leah. Yeah, that's a good question. Is anyone wants to answer to that, or we can keep on? Yeah, Jason.
I mean, to Leah's point, I think the idea like big data, by everyone sort of contributing, but also the potential for AI in really all aspects of maritime archaeology, just in terms of, more and more information is being scanned and is made accessible, and then with the ability of AI to start to identify specific research themes, I think that's going to have a huge impact on this study and really, sort of maritime archaeology in general within the next, well, probably few years, but let's say decade. So, but yeah, so I think AI is something that none of us are probably using to its fullest. Maybe, I don't know. I certainly am not. But I think it is something that is inevitable. It's going to impact how we really do research, in particular historical research. So yeah.
Thank you, Jason. Does anyone want to follow on what Jason said? Or we can go with our last question, and then we will have time for all the people invited to ask questions to our panelists, and our panelists to answer to them. So what role can community archaeology and public engagement play in preserving and interpreting pirate heritage, especially underwater sites at risk? And it kind of follow what says Charlie about that. So whenever who wants to answer to that?
I can say something if that's okay.
Yes, yeah, sure.
So this is something I'm definitely very passionate about, and my entire PhD is focused on using archaeology. It's a bit of action archaeology, which I don't know if is maybe loved so much in the academic community, but using archaeology as a platform, I think, is really, really important. Basically, especially, I think, talking about maybe something that Dr. Beeker mentioned, archaeological sites, underwater archaeological sites are often paired with endangered marine biology sites as well. And we have this huge platform across the entire world, the UN Ocean Decade, which is this decade from 2020 to 2030, where they're trying to protect 30 by 30% of the ocean by 2030. Archaeology is uniquely poised to be able to use the intrigue that is, always loved by people. Everyone loves history. and then use that to help protect our own sites, but also the ocean environment more broadly. So I think the fact that we all see the spark in people's eyes when we start to talk about pirate ship, and we should actually be using that to engage the public, and then also use it in tandem to protect the environment. And that's actually basically what my whole PhD is about. So I definitely think that at least where I am in academia, people don't like to use that type of action archaeology, but I think it's becoming increasingly more important that we do engage in that discussion, and we do get ourselves invited to those conferences where they're talking about ocean protection, and we're just looking at it from a slightly different perspective. So I think this is something that this is a big opportunity in my view for us, and I think it's something that we're starting to do, and I'm looking forward to see what the next decade brings in this respect.
Thank you. I can't wait to read your PhD thesis. So, Charlie, do you want to go back on what you said about the site of Captain Kidd?
Yeah, I've been a proponent for many years of using what we call peer pressure principle, that if you could get the community involved to help protect the site, you can have whatever laws you want, but if the locals aren't interested, the site's not going to be protected. And again, a few days ago, I was on the Captain Kidd site, which is a park. We've got a historic marker on the site. We've got, I'm proud to say, Indiana limestone holder for our brass plaque on the site. We've got moorings on the site. And when we encountered fishing going on, gill net fishing, which is totally illegal in the area, I was rather surprised, but we had a lot of backing with the community people and with the government for us to literally release a whole series, more than a dozen fish from the nets themselves, the gill net, and then cut the net out and take it out, knowing that the fishermen were not going to be very happy with it. But I was glad to see the community people were saying, no, you did the right thing. It's illegal to do these kinds of activities, and particularly the entire island in this case is protected according to law, but it's a paper protection. It's just drawn on a map. U.S. government gives $38 million to the Dominican government for 32% of the island to be protected areas, but there's no protection. There's no enforcement. There's no really ability beyond the community people to protect the site. So I'm really advocating, again, this is a park, a living museum, a marine protected area. Within a protected area, and talking with the government, they said, well, the whole island's protected. Why do we need an extra area? And I said, well, let's just call this a special protected area within a protected area of the Captain Kidd ship. So when a spear fisherman comes by, lift up his spear gun, go across the site, put it back down again, whatever he's doing illegally elsewhere, let's keep him off the Captain Kidd shipwreck. So with that community involvement, we now have a site that's better protected from looting or hobby collectors. It's better protected for the biology of the site, the fishes on the site. And it's through that community engagement, it's the only way we're going to protect these sites. And I don't care if we're talking each one of your countries. I can give examples of more of this, including Indiana. We just made our first shipwreck park, not a pirate ship, of course, in Indiana. And our state is now allowing us to put buoys on a couple of the sites that are being opened up. And they're better protected to be marked and identified than just think no one's going to know they exist. So community, real important, and anytime we as archaeologists can engage that community to tell them why it's significant, these sites, using piracy is great, but all the shipwrecks, as we know, are important. So that's kind of my 2 cents on it.
Thank you, Charlie. Connie, you wanted to speak earlier about that.
Yeah, I think for me, I engaged with the community straight away when I was doing my survey, even in advance of starting my survey, my field survey, because I just felt that first of all, they'd wonder who this stranger was walking over their land. So I had to make sure they knew who I was. But they had knowledge of, and I'm not talking about the knowledge of the area that you find on local maps. They actually had different names for places that had come down through families and through tradition. And the names they had of like they had field names like Boathouse Field, and they had the long dock in areas where there was no sign of any archaeology on our archaeological survey. And they were able to tell me about things that they were able to do when they were kids, or their parents did when they were children or younger in those places, and there was a lot more there. So I picked up a huge amount of knowledge and understanding of the landscape from the community themselves that lived there every day. And when I did my field survey, then afterwards I looked at those field places, I looked at the intertidal zone, and lo and behold, there was an evidence of a fairly substantial dock there, but it was only the basal remains of it. It had been robbed out, and the boathouse field had an actual key on it. So, and none of these had been recorded. So, while where archaeology can play a role then is coming in and truthing those sites, but when I told the community what I was doing, they started talking about different areas and the traditions they had heard about pirate activity and all that. And they were enthused by what I was saying, and I was certainly enthused by what they were saying. So we kind of reached a common excitement almost when we were chatting together, and I got to know the community. But I don't think you can do a pirate study without involving the community, because they have the knowledge on the ground. So I would say community is hugely important to any study of piracy.
Perfect. Yeah, Mike, you want to say something?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, for the last 20 years, the Florida Public Archaeology Network was created through state legislation in 2004. So we're actually 21 years old now. And I've been part of the Florida Public Archaeology Network for 14 of those years. And so we're a very unique public archaeology program. There's nothing quite like us anywhere else in terms of how it's structured. Our headquarters is here in Pensacola, Florida, but we have 8 regional offices in the 3rd most highly populated state in the United States. So every single day, our staff of 18 public archaeologists are out there engaging people with archaeology to try to teach them why it's important. And that's really goes back to what Dr. Beeker said. You know, we have state laws, we have federal laws, we have local ordinances, we have county ordinances in some counties across the state with protections for both sites on land and underwater. But the reality is the amount of looting that takes place is, I think, worse now than it was when FPAN started 20 years ago. And I think a lot of that's been driven by social media. Just go on TikTok or Instagram Reel or YouTube, and you'll see some very active looting taking place across the world, really. We were founded in 2004 legislatively for that purpose. If you look at how we were formed to stop the rapid deterioration of Florida's archaeological heritage, mostly through looting. And that's certainly the case with shipwreck sites, where monitoring of those is much more difficult. You know, the state of Florida has 4 underwater archaeologists for the entire state. And so it's really hard to monitor those. But that's where the community can really make a huge difference. If you can convince the community why these places are important, whether they're on land or other water, whether it's a fishing vessel or whether it's a pirate ship, that why it should matter to the community and why they should care about it, then they will ultimately be the ones to be the eyes and ears on the ground. Just 2 months ago, because of the work we've done with the community here in the Pensacola area, we had a site not far from where I'm at, a pretty significant one that was looted. That was actually an unrecorded site. And the only reason we know it was looted and the only reason it's recorded now is because a local community member was walking around and they saw it. And they had been to our programs before and knew what to do. And so it's incredibly important that we engage the public with what we find, that we teach them the difference between treasure hunting and why looting is bad and why archaeology is the right way to do it. Because without them, we simply don't exist. We are a publicly funded university. We're a publicly funded program. So we're paid by taxpayers. And so we want to make sure that we're being good stewards of that money, but also good stewards of the cultural resources that belong to all Floridians and all people across the world. Yeah, get out there, go to talks, do presentations. It really does make a difference. You know, it may not seem like it, but it really does add up. And I think piracy's, you know, it's people are fascinated by it. And to me, the protection of underwater cultural heritage is like the hook, and the piracy can be the bait that we put on that hook to kind of hook people on to these bigger messages of preservation and interpretation. So yeah, community archaeology, if we don't have that, then we really don't have the support.
Thank you, Mike. Does anyone want to add to this or no? Yes, Charlie.
Well, I think you're getting close here, Iness, but I just want to make sure that we all understand that by you putting this together with the other grad students, piracy brought all of us in here. And looking at the audience attendees, I'm seeing, of course, Cayman Islands and representatives in Mexico, and we got the UK, and I see France and Ireland. We've got, of course, in the US, Mike with Florida and Texas. I'm with Indiana, and if it hadn't been for you putting together the graduate students' particular forum, we might not all be on this particular discussion. So I want to thank you for doing this. I think it's very commendable that we all jumped on because of piracy, but we're also here because we're archaeologists, of course. So a big kudos to you and the other people that put this thing on.
Thank you, Charlie. Nothing would have been made today if we didn't have the support of the ACUA and Tony Carroll and Sarah Holland and all the graduate students. So here, Christina, Giudici, and Riveira and Scott Wheeler that are also my colleagues in it. So thank you very much. That's very kind for us. Maybe it's time we have 20 minutes left to let the other participants to ask their questions. So if you have anything to, so Jean has a question. So you wanted to know the point of view of the American colleagues about what is going on with the wider shipwreck these past years. And so what do you think, authorization or a treasure hunter? And same for the organization of the research on the Bahamas and around Nassau by Sean Kingsley, which is very, there's a lot of talking about that. So if you have something to say about that, to answer Jean and Connie. No one has something to say about that?
Well, I
Yeah,
mean,
Jason?
clearly, this is a subject that we wrestle with not only with piracy, but with all aspects of maritime archaeology. And, there are certain types of vessels that are of interest to treasure hunters. And, and in some cases, that's a pretty tricky conversation, in terms of what do we see as treasure hunting, and how someone like Barry Clifford with the WITA, has kept the collection together, but is profiting from the investigation of a shipwreck site, and through any number of things. But it's also just comes back to the quality of the archaeological research that's been undertaken. Recently was involved in studying another site that I've long been interested in, not piracy, but a different site in the Pacific, and was really amazed to see the links that were taken to try to legitimize what is otherwise a treasure hunt. So I think that it's a really tricky situation, and as to say, like, what exactly we mean by treasure hunting. In the United States, we went through a period in the 50s through the 80s and continues, but where it was wholesale pillaging of sites. I mean, we can see that through investigations that were undertaken in the 70s, and how the sites have been impacted in such incredible ways in the Florida Keys. The 1733 galleon fleet's a perfect example of that, how these sites have been just impacted you know, in crazy ways. So yeah, I don't know if I'm answering the question exactly right, but I do think that we have to be very careful about how we how we approach material culture that results from you know, a loss of context through investigations or a lack of planning for investigations, because it's tricky. I mean, honestly, we have certain types of things like the Manila Galleon trade. We know so very little about it archaeologically because the sites that have been found have been treasure hunted. And so therefore, all we can go from is we have the context that tells us, well, these artifacts supposedly came from this site, right? Does that discount the fact that we now know something about a wreck that occurred in 1601 when it wasn't collected archaeologically? I think it's it's an interesting question you're asking, but certainly one that we have to be very careful not to qualify people who have gone to great lengths to issue our standards. So.
Thank you very much, Jason, for your answer. Paul Johnston just said that if someone wanted more information on the weather, he could contact him offline with his mail address, which is in the chat. So don't hesitate. Thank you very much, Paul, for that. Lynn Allen has a question for Mike specifically. She just graduated from University of Florida, and she's really interested in the American Revolution, early Republic period, and privateering. A lot of what I've read is on, she read is on the Long Island and Sound, and she was wondering what other good resources were there on the topic. So thank you, Lynn, for this question, and Mike.
Yeah. So yeah, well, congratulations on graduating. So you're a Gator, which is great. Yeah, that's really cool. There's a lot of sources out there. I'm happy to, what I can do is in the comment section, I'll put my email in there and then just email me and I'll send you a whole list. But one area specifically with the Revolution, all the privateer prize court cases have been digitized on a website called fold3.com. It was bought by ancestry.com a few years ago, but all those prize court cases have been digitized. There's hundreds and hundreds of documents. There's a couple of other scholars that have looked at a lot of the federal cases, privateer cases, looking at patriot privateers going into South America. I can recommend a couple of books to you as well. So I'll put my email in there, and then I'm happy to send you everything that I have. And but that's a good spot to look with the Revolution is going to be those prize court cases.
Thank you, Mike. Does anyone has questions for our panelist or other question to other panelists or anyone? You're free to speak. Yes, Jean?
On peut poser une question, c'est ça? Une nouvelle question?
Oui.
Je n'ai pas entendu. Yes, I think so. It's interesting to understand the relation the relation between the pirates and the local community, specifically in Sainte Marie in Madagascar. It's in aspect very special to understand this relation by the material culture. In the Sainte Marie excavations last May, just last weeks, we know and the same things in the last year. We know in the same context, in the postals, in the same postals, in the same context, and the Chinese porcelain and pottery, Malagasy pottery, in the same in the same context. It is interesting to show the contact and the side context between the two community. It's a relation with the archives to explain this relation between Malagasy and pirates in a same period in the same time, and I would like to explain these things because I think so we potentially have a same thing in a Caribbean probably, yeah, in the Caribbean sites, I think so, and to use the Sainte Marie example for this for develop this problematic especially.
Thank you, Jean. So does anyone have to answer or follow what Jean said about the work in the Caribbean?
And we have, et j'ajoute juste une chose, and we have the influence in the architecture of the settlement. The Malagasy architecture, the falafa, it's a case, it's a small hut with post holes. But the pirates use a different material pour caler, to make faut que tu m'aides. C'est
Ouais.
difficile à dire.
Pas de souci. Pour settle?
Pour installer les poteaux, ils utilisent des galets, mais aussi des briques hollandaises,
Yeah.
etc.
Okay, so to stick the pole, the wood pole, they use bricks and stones, like round stones. So
Netherland bricks in a
Netherlands
yellow,
ones.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, in a yellow argile.
Yeah, clay.
Clay, ouais.
Yellow clay. Okay.
And, et là tu vas m'aider parce que en anglais ça va être compliqué. On a aussi un four avec des pierres chauffantes. C'est
They also
difficile,
have a
hein.
stove with
Yeah.
Stones, warm stones. Sorry,
Ouais.
I don't know the word for that.
C'est
Yeah.
un four utilisé
Yeah.
avec des pierres chauffantes. Voilà.
Yeah.
Voilà.
Warming stones.
Et on a les trous de poteaux, the post holes with a stone and a shell, a big shell, lambi, etc., etc. It's probably the influence of with two architectural styles between Malagasy tradition and the traditional postals, European postals in the Caribbean or African. It's a melting pot of tradition of architecture.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Good
we
to
have
know.
and we have a very important quantity of Malagasy ceramic, not one or two. It's a 300 in a small context with decoration, etc. And with a Chinese porcelain and Coulaud bottle from India, etc. In the same context.
Does anyone have seen such construction in their site or on another site? Maybe we can keep on. Tony has a question. So, has anyone looked at the relationship between the shore communities, economies, and piracy? The second city of Port Royal benefited. Are there other examples? Jason, do you have something about it? Other examples or
I have not really considered the shore communities of piracy, really. I do think that there have been some interesting studies. Again, going back to the Lafitte brothers, and to think about, again, this sort of really multi-dimensional sort of world of piracy. I think it's really kind of fascinating. Port Royal itself, undoubtedly. You really have to go back to the idea of politics and geopolitics, right? And how you have sympathetic, local officials who could allow something like a city to be known as, the what was the moniker of Port Royal? Was the filthiest city on the planet or something like that. But we know that there are other places like that, like Roatan in Honduras. Roatan Island was also considered to be a pirate haunt. So, I mean, I think there is undoubtedly a larger study to be done, but myself, no, I haven't really engaged that much.
Yes, Connie, sorry, Connie raised her hand first, so we're listening to you.
Okay,
No worries,
sorry.
you go first.
Yeah, apologies, my internet crashed there. I had to come back on. Yeah, I kind of, part of my studies is the actual social settlement site area where the pirates had their headquarters. And from looking at the Admiralty records in the National Archives in London, I've got really good information on the I suppose the family background of an awful lot of the pirates, because they settled their families there too, and that they'd begun to sea for 18 months and they'd be sending money home, and the wives in turn might be running a tavern or prostitution. And I've got into the study of the women, because a lot of the time the females in the background of the families are really, pirates tend to be invisible by design. The women are completely invisible by sorry, the other way around, by desire, whereas the women are invisible by design. But so I have done quite a bit of study on the actual pirate settlement in southwest Cork in Ireland, and it was very vibrant. And in fact, if the women didn't get their money from their husbands, they would challenge the local Admiralty officer because he was as corrupt as the rest of them, or looked upon to be. So I think there's a real study there to be made on the social aspect and the familial aspect of piracy as well. And it humanizes the pirates themselves more when you see their family life and what they were doing ashore as well, and how all that operated. So I think it makes the story a lot more real if you lucky enough to be able to get insights into that.
That's still a good point of view to have. And just to follow up on your work, Giuidici Denton in the chat just mentioned your excellent publication, The Alliance of Pirates, Ireland and Atlantic Piracy in the early 17th century. So thank you, Connie. Mike, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just to touch on Tony's question, I think, the relationship was that the pirates who were out at sea could not have maintained their operations without having support on land in those shoreline communities. And so if you look at places, I think New Orleans is a great example that Jason mentioned, and I mentioned, there's incidents that we have that are documented in the 1820s when they're throwing these accused pirates in jail. Literally, the community members are breaking them out of prison. There was also we know that, again, there was a difference between what the nation state and the press was saying about these individuals, and then the local communities themselves and how they viewed them. Because most of the time, especially for these pirates who are operating more kind of on a regional basis, they were part of the community. They were community members, and a lot of them had been involved in privateering. That was completely legal, was a legitimate form of maritime trade. And then when those conflicts, or when those commissions or letters of marque would come to an end, oftentimes they would just continue doing the same thing that they had always been doing. And then all of a sudden you're accused as a pirate, and the communities didn't like that. So we have lots of incidents of that taking place on the northern coast of Cuba. We have lots of documentation from these naval officers who are basically telling their commanders, like, listen, we can capture these ships, we can get them in court and try it. But if you really want to stop this, you're going to have to, it's going to have to be these at the community level. You're going to have to get these local officials to cooperate. You're going to have to get these local individuals who are giving them cover, providing them, buying these items that they're stealing that they may not otherwise have access to because of mercantilism. So you're going to have to address these issues on shore. We also see, I wrote a piece about a year ago about a privateer that became a pirate, an active pirate, during Brazil's war with Uruguay in 1828. And where were they taking all these illicit materials? They were taking them to St. Bart's. And so St. Bart's was notorious as an area for pirates to come and basically, offload, fence all the items that they had stolen. And so they had a lot of community support for that as well. So yeah, I think there was certainly a correlation between these pirates where they were operating at, and then these local communities that were providing them support, shelter, as well as being the ones that were their customers. There's a case, and the last thing I'll mention is there's a great book written by Dr. David Head that came out a number of years ago. He looked at privateering during the revolutions down in South America. And basically he analyzed all the court cases, all the cases that were brought to trial, federal court cases and the private and prize courts, as well as federal court cases. And basically what he found that about half the time, the pirates that were accused actually got off. The juries found them not guilty. And that case that I mentioned here in Pensacola in 1823, the exact same thing happened. The jury ruled in favor of these accused pirates, and those pirates actually eventually got their ship back and just continued operating. And you can't have that without having that local community support. So I think there's plenty of evidence for it that's out there. But in terms of looking at sort of comprehensive study, I know it's been done sort of regionally, but it'd be interesting if, maybe that's a volume at some point, the economy of it.
Thank you, Mike. I think it's going to be the time for our last question. So from Wayne Lozardi, are there ethnographic studies comparing the methodologies, popular culture, and material culture of today's pirates relative to modern seafarers that compare to historic pirates versus historic seafarers? Jason, do you have something about that? No?
Not really off the top of my head. I can't think of any ethnographic studies comparing sort of similar studies. I mean, it's hard to say the way piracy is conducted now, but it makes me think of going back to our discussion of what would be a pirate ship. Nowadays, a pirate ship is more or less like an open hull, an open boat with a person with an RPG threatening to blow up a ship, and I think maybe that might equate to Mike's idea of like a sloop being fast enough and quick enough and being able to make, sharp enough attacks to be able to scare people into submission. But yeah, I think that's a tricky one that I haven't put a lot of thought into. So.
No worries. Sorry that we were not able to answer to your question, Wayne. So I think it's the time for us to say goodbye. Just for information, Roberto Runco just sent information about their latest documentary about Port Royal. So if you're interested, don't hesitate to go in the chat. So thank you very much for being here, all the panelists, Mike, Jason, Leah, Alexandre, Jean, Yann, Charlie, and Connie for being there. That's very important for us.
Many thanks.
And yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for the help, Tony and Sarah, for all the help this year as graduate students, associates. As graduate students associate, we are volunteers, so doing this on the side of what we do and our work and actually on site and everything is very that can be hard, but like seeing so many people joining, it's very interesting. So and very, very fun. So thank you very much. And I hope that everyone had the opportunity to speak. And as there were so many people, maybe one day we will do another panel about another subject about piracy, because there's a lot to do still. So thank you again, and hope to see you in other meetings.